Nothing throws a wrench into the intimacy inside of your relationship quite like having a baby. They say you're gonna have increased desire while pregnant. They say to get the baby out the same way you got it in, and after 6 weeks, you're good to go. All that's a hard no for me. In this video, I'm gonna talk about sex after pregnancy. I'm gonna share my 2 different experiences with my 2 pregnancies and how it all went down. The good, the bad, the gross. We're also gonna talk about how we had our longest dry spell after we had our daughter. There's a well-documented dip in intimacy after we have children. And I truly believe how we navigate this time in our relationship can set you up for better intimacy after babies or less intimacy after babies. In my experience, we have better, more frequent and fulfilling intimacy after babies than we ever did before. A lot of what I'm going to share is unavoidable. It is part of the season that you're in. And it doesn't have to be forever. If you're new here, my name is Janelle Fraser, and we talk about all things overcoming intimacy struggles in long-term loving relationships. So if you're a woman who has struggled with desire and feeling turned on and really wanting just to break free from that struggle, check out my free training. And if you're a man who loves this woman and doesn't know how to support her and as a result feels starving and a little bit hopeless when it comes to the intimacy in your relationship, I have a free training for you as well. So the men's and women's training are both linked below. Take the 1 second to like this video to help other people find it. Subscribe so you're gonna see new videos when I post them. And share this video out with your partner as well as your close friends who are going through this baby making phase to help to not be alone in this conversation and to have someone to talk about it with. So some people say that you have an increased desire for intimacy while pregnant. So I was waiting for that and I was hoping for that. And as someone who had struggled with intimacy for a lot of our relationship, I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be my time to shine. Nah, that didn't happen. So that doesn't happen for everyone, although my experience with sex did change while being pregnant. So one thing that I enjoyed during both pregnancies is not worrying about getting pregnant. And so that added a little bit more fun and spontaneity and just restrictionless sex, if you will. So one thing that changed inside of my first pregnancy was that intimacy actually did feel better. My tissues, quite literally, just felt more sensitive and in tune. And so even though I didn't have a higher desire, when I did engage, it often felt better. In my second pregnancy, I was expecting the same thing to happen. And so our intimacy has improved so much between baby number 1 and baby number 2. I thought, great, we're not gonna have to worry about getting pregnant. I'm gonna have better sensation. This is gonna be awesome. And right away in my second pregnancy, I had pain during intercourse. And through the entire pregnancy, intercourse was chafy and uncomfortable. And so that put a huge downer on intimacy leading up to having the baby. So we're not even talking postpartum at this point. So changes can absolutely be happening in your intimacy right from the moment you get pregnant. It's all fun and games until someone gets pregnant. In my second pregnancy, I had more desire, but because of the struggle with the discomfort, we got a little bit more creative and I was actually desiring a lot more bum play and just different experimentation because intercourse really wasn't something that was on the table. I wasn't gonna do something that was uncomfortable, that was gonna hurt my body, that was gonna put me in any other stress or discomfort. So my mind came up with other ways that I would enjoy. When you're about to have that baby, everyone's always saying, get the baby out the same way it got in, right? Have intercourse to help to stimulate labor and bring that baby out into the world. That was a no for me. That was a no for me for both pregnancies. So getting closer to delivery date already started to create a bit of a dry spell in the relationship, right? In my first pregnancy, I worried about this a little bit more, it weighed a little bit heavier on my mind and my heart because I knew there was going to be a big gap after the pregnancy. I kind of felt bad, I guess, during my first pregnancy. But for my second pregnancy, I didn't feel bad. In the time frame between first and second pregnancy, I have developed so much confidence, the ability to use my voice, the ability to not cross my boundaries, to trust my body, and also just knowing that this is a season that we're going through and this is just what it is. And I don't need to make it mean anything about me or our relationship. And it's just part of what's happening. So at 6 weeks, you are good to go, right? You go to your OB, your doctor, they give a check over, and basically they give you the okay to exercise and to have intercourse. Is in a normal situation what tends to happen? Well, for me, I wasn't ready for that, right? And one, I don't put that pressure on myself, but I did feel that pressure in my first pregnancy, although I was nowhere near ready in my first pregnancy, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But in my second pregnancy, I also didn't put that pressure on myself. I knew that when I was ready, I would be ready. My body just went through this beautiful, transformative, wild experience. And I was just gonna honor her and not try to push or force her into something, right? A lot of times I think people have this feeling of pressure of like needing to get back into things because of their partner, and make sure you have a supportive partner. If you don't, let's have these conversations as early on as possible, because at the end of the day, you are doing this for both of you, and this is a season that you're in, and it's not forever. And more than any time in your life, you need to honor yourself now. And like I said at the beginning of this video, that what happens in this birthing postpartum period when it comes to your intimacy and how you both handle that and navigate that and the pressures and the ways that you move forward truly set up your relationship for a positive future with intimacy, or one that's pressure filled, feeling like it's something you just have to do and it's not mutually enjoyable. That's not what you want. Please don't make the 6-week mark a rule or an expectation. It's a guideline. It's really a starting place. What I will say is I tore for both of my pregnancies, but in my first pregnancy, I went back after 6 weeks and they're like, everything looks good. And I'm like, there's no way it looks good, because it feels like when you're just looking down there that you're ripping me open. If you put one finger on me, it feels like you're ripping me wide open. Like, why are you ripping and tearing down there? And she's like, I'm not even touching you. At 6-week mark, I might have physically appeared visually healed, but there was lots of healing that needed to be done on a emotional, mental, physical, soul level. There was a lot going on. And if I had had that expectation, that would have put so much pressure on me, and I would have been overriding my body's boundaries. I probably would have been hurting myself even more and potentially setting myself up for a lifetime of painful intimacy. I had 2 beautiful home births. Calm. I did hypnobirthing. I was peaceful and relaxed. My midwives didn't really help me at all. They were just there to observe and support. And I tore both times. With my first, the healing was quite extensive. As I talked about, at that 6-week mark, I was far from healed. And at that 6-week mark, they also do a pap test to kind of make sure everything is good in there. And I had cellular change that had happened on my cervix that led me to end up having to go to a gyno, getting a follow-up pap, then determining that I had to get a LEEP procedure and get those cells removed and get them biopsied. And there was this whole stressful period afterwards, this was all after the 6-week mark, that during all those procedures, it felt like they were ripping me open. I was in so much pain, even though visually everything looked totally fine and no one could explain why. Finally, I got hooked up with a pelvic floor physiotherapist to figure out why I was in such pain. Months went on, like now we're 6 months into postpartum healing, and I still am in pain. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I had this great birth. Yes, I tore. Lots of women tear. What is going on? So when I went to the pelvic floor physiotherapist, again, visually, everything looked good. But psychosomatically, my body was reacting. It was like hyper reacting. First of all, it was hyper tight, and it was hyper reactive, meaning like even a finger touching it, unless it was my own, if I could touch myself, and that was even more confusing. But if my partner or a doctor or someone else touched me, it literally felt like I was getting ripped open. And because I couldn't fully see down there, I kept going to my midwife, my doctors, and OBG, and then the physio, and it's like, I'm clearly still like have a wound down there. And like, I was convinced that there was something else going on. But there was just a deeper level of healing that needed to happen for that pregnancy. Long story short, I worked on some exercises to really just desensitize that area and help to relax it, help to basically tell my vagina like, you're okay and you're safe and you don't need to protect yourself. It was like, she was like, ah! Like on guard. I'm a why person. I like to know why I'm experiencing what I am, and I like to look deeper. So one, this is a trigger warning. This is also my opinion and perspective, backed by also my training as to what happened in that healing journey for me. So as a survivor of childhood sexual trauma, I had done a lot of healing leading up to that point. They say that trauma is held in your body and held in your tissues. And I did a lot of like mental and emotional healing, but I had never done any like physical work in my tissues. I believe that I was already carrying a lot of tension in that area, a lot of clenching and tightness. And so when that baby came through, even though I was mentally and emotionally relaxed, that specific opening was not relaxed and was still very much in like trauma mode. So it kind of got ripped open, so to speak. And so I think being my body really, because you held that tension anyways, I think it really went into protection mode and like, and so that healing process was so profound for me to actually start listening to my body and only moving as slowly as she wanted to move. Before baby number one, I would often like move a lot faster than I wanted to. Even if sex was a little bit uncomfortable, I might just keep going. I might not ask for what I need. But in order to start having sex again, I had to find my voice. I had to direct my partner. I had to take things slow. I had to take it one step at a time. And that was so transformational in our relationship and in our intimate life and in my sex drive. I can't even tell you. So it was 11 months of a dry spell after we had our daughter that we finally were able to have intercourse again. So because that's what happened with baby number one, I was quite nervous, specifically about tearing again. So we had another beautiful home birth, all went well. And that was the hardest part about the labor, was thinking about that tear, thinking about the stitching up process, thinking about the healing process, thinking about the intimacy struggle. Like all that was kind of in my mind as I was birthing. And so that was even affecting my pushing a little bit in those moments. I did tear with baby number two, but right from the get-go, it was completely different. I controlled the situation. Instead of just like the first time, I kind of just like laid back after this like beautiful experience and then just like had this very traumatic stitching period and just let them do whatever. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know how long it was going to take, all of these things. So instead, in the second pregnancy, I knew what was going to happen because they had to stitch me up. And so I kind of controlled the situation and I said, okay, just let me take a breath. So I got comfortable, got into position. I like took a few breaths to calm down. I asked her to walk me through the process of what she was going to do. Then we basically just kind of went step one, step two. After she did step one, I said, okay, like give me a moment. Let me take a breath, do a few more. Let me take a breath. And I felt like instead of it just happening to me, I felt like I was a part of the process. I was advocating for myself and my body. And she was getting permission to carry on and not versus like just getting in there and getting it done. My midwives were fabulous the first time. And that was just me the second time. It was having that voice and asking for what I needed, which made that stitching process so much better and not really traumatic at all. It wasn't fun, but it wasn't like sticking with me as like horrible. Healing just went so much smoother. So I was shocked that within a couple weeks, I was like, I actually feel quite good. When I went and had my 6-week follow-up, everything looked good and actually felt good. I was super surprised. I was worried about her doing that pap test and me feeling that ripping sensation again. And so I actually, again, used my own voice and I advocated for myself to actually put the tools in my vagina myself so that I could control that pressure because nothing had been in there yet. And I was rightfully a little bit nervous. No pain and discomfort to my surprise. So at the 6-week mark, what she did tell me was, you know, technically you can have intercourse now and exercise and all these things. And I had just said, like, I'm just so not ready for that. And she said, no, like that's totally a guideline. Most women aren't. Some people feel pressured that they should be. Like, oh, I definitely don't feel pressured and I'm not ready for that. But it will come. And I didn't know how long. I will say that I was nervous. I was nervous that it was going to be like 11 months again. I just didn't want it to be that long, because that long does create just kind of an awkwardness of connecting. And I knew that if it was that long, that we would still connect and find other ways, as we even did through my second pregnancy, when intercourse wasn't really an option. But I wanted it to be smoother, right? And it felt like it was going to be. And so I just continued to trust my body, and the healing was super smooth. At my 6-week checkup with my second, when she was doing the pap test, she did say, when I scraped your cervix, instantly it started bleeding. So that also told me that physically I was just barely healed at that 6-week mark. And yes, that's totally normal. And if I had had the desire to have intimacy, it still would have been completely safe to do so. But it was just showing that there was still significant healing that was being done because of how sensitive my cervix was. And just emotionally, mentally, physically, I just wasn't feeling ready. And that also felt confirming to that. And so for both children, I knew that I was ready to get back into intimacy at a completely different timeline. And I'll talk about my second when we got back in intimacy in a minute, but I knew that I was ready for intimacy again, kind of in the same way for both of them, is I actually had the desire. I was like dreaming about it a little bit, or I'd wake up and like almost like forget for a moment that we have like 2 children that are like in bed with us or going to be waking up in a second. And it's just like feeling that desire to just like roll over and be snuggled and close. And like, I just started having, dreams or sensations that I was ready. And I remember with my first, I was really shocked because it had been a long time and there was a big recovery and I had no idea where this was leading us to. And I remember being surprised by these dreams and by these feelings that happened. And so the same thing actually happened with my second as well. With my second, it was in the 10 to 12 week range where I was feeling that desire again. And I was pleasantly surprised by it. I was happy that I was like feeling good. And I didn't really know how it was going to feel. And so we kind of just planned to like connect and be intimate, but not necessarily do intercourse, kind of get back into other forms of intimacy and the range of intimacy, which I talk about in my free intimacy guide, and I'll link that below. So just starting to like, you know, not going from 0 to 10, just starting to get back into touching again, right? Having that quality close time together. And to my surprise, even that evening that we first had intercourse, I didn't think that I was going to do that, but in the process, I kind of was like craving it and desiring it. And then I was like very pleasantly surprised when like it didn't even hurt at all. And I think because I was turned on and I was open and like I just didn't have all of that. Like I thought I was going to still have to go through that like discomfort phase or like, you know, slowly desensitizing things again. I was fully prepared that that was going to be the case. And it wasn't. So that was awesome. There are just so many changes that happen after you have that baby, from physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, hormonal, and that can create a lot of insecurities around our body. It can create a lot of like flex in our emotions. It can play with our libido hugely, our energy levels. Like every time you're using the washroom, you're using like a Perrier bottle. It can change the relationship you have to your body in general, because if you're breastfeeding as well, you're like, you know, using your like once what was like a more of a sexual part of your body. Now you're using it in a very nurturing, mothering way. Like it can be really tricky and take some time to kind of flip back into sexy mode when you're just transitioning into mother mode. So just encouraging you to be very gentle on yourself during this transition. And by transition, I mean like 2 years after, because so many things change. And I remember it's like even just with like my boobs alone, the transition that I had to take from like a sexual thing to a mothering thing. But then sometimes, my partner or I still wanted him to like enjoy them in a sexual way, but I breastfed for 2.5 years. So they really just felt like a mothering thing. And then how your boobs change, right? They're like engorged and big, and then they're like squirting milk, and then they're like sagging or having loose skin. Like there's just such a transition that all these phases that happen that can bring up insecurities and or just discomfort or wanting to be touched differently. And we just really need to take things slow and get to know our bodies and ourselves again. A year, 2, 5 years after, you're not the same person that you were before you got pregnant. They say when a baby is birthed, a mother is birthed as well. And it changes you, it changes your body. Another sex expert that I follow, she talks about how like the sex that was working for her before she had her babies, once she had her second child, it's like that wasn't working for her anymore. And even as a sex expert, how confusing that was. And I can absolutely attest to that. And I see that with my clients all the time, that we need to relearn after pregnancy and after babies how our body wants to be touched. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make, is assuming they're going to go back to the same intimacy. It's not that we're losing something, it's that it's evolving, it's expanding, it's deepening, and you need to take that time to get to know your partner again, how they like to be touched, how they like to be interacted with, which you're definitely going to see a very good sneak peek at that inside of my free intimacy guide, as well as the men and women's trainings that I mentioned below. Because being able to interact with each other in a way that works for who you are now is so important for making it an enjoyable experience and something you're going to actually want to do. So even once you're through that initial, newborn phase, maybe your baby is 7 months like mine. What we're experiencing more so now is extended tiredness. Right now, you're not just like living on the hormones in the first couple of weeks. You've been like struggling with sleep for months. None of my kids are great sleepers. They're all exclusively breastfed. So they're up several times a night. It's like musical beds in this house. So you're dealing with extended tiredness on top of the hormonal changes, on top of the lifestyle changes. And it can be really tricky in these early days of small children to find the time. I know sometimes I'll get comments out of people like, mothers seem to think that their babies never sleep and that they never have time for their husbands because their babies never sleep. And it's like, well, first of all, some babies very rarely sleep without being physically touched by someone. So there's that. Second of all, if you happen to have a baby that does like to sleep, it's like, what did it take to get them to sleep? I know just a moment ago, I was fighting with my 7-month-old to go to sleep because he loves to fight sleep. And by the time I finally get him down for what hopefully he'll stay down for in the day, 45 minutes, at night, maybe 2 hours, it's like, what state am I in? Often I'm like frustrated or annoyed or exhausted at that point. And like the last thing that's on my mind is, oh, how can I go like take care of my partner or their needs? Or it's like, I'm just trying to get my nervous system regulated and take a breath and get as much sleep as I can, because that child is going to need me again. So, of course, there's ways to help each other out. Of course, intimacy can give back to us as well. And there are these very real things that we go through. On top of that, times that now when we are experiencing having intimate moments, it's like, okay, we have a 5-year-old that could run into our room at any time. We have a baby who could wake up at any time. We've got a monitor that's like brightening up the room. That's like, we're hearing noises, so we're like peeking at the monitor. Like, it takes you out of the mood. It is really tricky, if not sometimes impossible, to like turn off mom brain and be able to drop into your body and drop into your sensuality. And that's a very real struggle that is kind of, again, a part of the season that we're in. when your kids get older and you get to sneak away for a weekend or have a night away, like, oh, that can feel so good to just like really step out of that mom mode. And it's not always really possible in these early days with young babes. Something that we're going through now that we didn't go through with our daughter because we weren't having regular intimacy is actually having sex when you don't have a regular period. And so with my daughter, I had already started my period again, and I had a consistent period before we started having sex again. And when we started having sex again, it was so irregular. Like, it was just because it was that big 11+ month gap. Whereas getting back into intimacy with my son after like 10 to 12 weeks, exclusively breastfeeding, so still not having a regular period, or right away I'm like, pretty sure I'm pregnant again, because my period wasn't consistent. And so that added like a new stress that we're kind of currently navigating of, okay, like, one, do we want to be having more children? I mean, we do have a 6-month-old, 7-month-old, so we don't, want one right this moment. Or do we ever? Yeah, we're not ready for a vasectomy yet. I don't use birth control by choice and health primarily. We're past condoms, I think, in our relationship. So it's like that, how do we do this? So I don't want to feel like I'm pregnant all the time. So, and like, it's before I'd be tracking my cycle, right? And knowing my cycle and knowing my body. But when you don't have a consistent cycle yet, so I'm hoping that syncs up. I did just start my period, but it hasn't been consistent. So I've had 2 months already. So I'm kind of hoping that levels out, because that was kind of a new stress that I didn't anticipate, because intimacy has felt easier and more desire after my second pregnancy. Then when I started my period, I noticed that there's definitely been hormonal changes that have happened even since then, because I just noticed like lubrication wise and energy and desire has changed. And it felt like it was different from like 10-12 weeks to when I started my period versus afterwards. Like, I had a few months where it felt like I just had a lot of desire, but then it's like since I started my period, something kind of shifted again. So again, things aren't consistent yet, and still figuring that out and optimizing my body and my hormonal health. But just, it's like, it's not a linear thing as well, because the healing takes time. And over the course of a year or two after you have a baby, so much is changing. And it's not just in that 6 weeks, it's not just in those 6 months. So again, being patient with yourself and not having all these expectations, but listening to your body, communicating with your partner, and just navigating the season you're in. Remembering that it is a season as well right now, that some things are going to slip. Like, I love the saying, you can have it all, you just can't have it all at the same time. And I think that helps me to release some of the pressure on like everything having to be happening perfectly at the same time. Whereas instead, what are the priorities that are right now? But with that being said, I think it's really easy, because kids are all consuming for like ever. I think it's easy to be like, oh, we're in the season of kids. And I see people using that as an excuse to like, why they don't have more closeness in their relationship or take more time for the relationship, is like, we'll do it after the kids are grown up. But I'm talking about specifically sex after having a baby. And I do think that this is a season. I think having children is also another season, but when you're in the grander season of having children and not having babies, I think we need to remember, because that season is so long, right? They're babies for a very short window. You have kids for a lot of a bigger window. And that season, like, what are you going to have left if you haven't poured into yourself, into your relationship during that season? So I don't think baby season is necessarily the time to put all this expectation around your relationship. I think it's really about maintaining, relearning about each other, and just fitting things in and doing your best. But it's a sneaky thing. As I mentioned at the start of this video, I do think that this phase can set you up for the rest of your child years as well as after children, the rest of your relationship, for the intimacy and the connection that you have. And so we do need to be cautious to not let this natural dry spell or disconnection that happens linger out into now just the way of being in our relationship. Baby's crying, that means I gotta go. You know a lot about me now, so let me know what your postpartum experience was like or what your biggest concerns are if that is a phase that you are going to be moving into. There's so many seasons that we go through in long-term relationships that affect our intimacy, so please subscribe so you can get more videos and share this out with your partner, with your friends, so you have someone to talk to about this whole crazy season that you're in. Make it a great day.